Now that the trip down to Pownell was real, Turner could hardly think of much else. The snow had stopped him from wheeling their household over to Mrs. Cobb's, and so mostly Mrs. Buckminster spent her days sorting and looking things over. In the study, she would stand and hold a book for a long time without even opening it. In the parlor, she would finger a vase as if it were some sort of talisman. She never cried in front of Turner, but Turner could hear her sometimes, late at night, and he felt his heart beat like a bird's. It snowed all that week, ending a white November and beginning a whiter December. Turner shoveled most of the time, stopping to watch Mr. Newton's great Frisians pulling the rollers to pack the snow, their breath steaming out of their nostrils and their heads turning with ease and power. Their flanks were so massive that it would not be hard to imagine them pulling Malaga Island right up to the mainland, if they could only find a place to tie on to. Turner shoveled out the parsonage again, and Mrs. Cobb's and Mr. Newton's. He even shoveled out First Congregational in time for Sunday services, which Deacon Hurd now led, and which Turner and his mother did not attend. Finally, when the sun decided it was time to rise clear and white, Mr. Newton was at Turner's door, the bells jingling on the Frisians' harnesses, the buffalo robes draped in the sled, and the hot soapstones on the seats and the foot warmers almost glowing with coals at their feet. They stayed warm all the way to the textile mill in Brunswick, with the wind at their backs and the heat under the robes. They brought the soapstones in to Houghton by the mill's coal stove and loaded up the sled with bolts of cloth wrapped in brown paper. Then Turner fetched the soapstones, and they headed to Yarmouth, the wind on their beam now and colder, so that Turner hunched the buffalo robe up and around him and wished that the embers in the foot warmers weren't dying so quickly. At Yarmouth they were disappointed. The man had already sold more than half of the promised syrup, and he had doubled the price on what remained, a price that no righteous anger or bargaining could bring down. "Lots of buyers to take it if you won't," was all the man kept repeating. Since this was probably true, and since old Mr. Thayer had told him he would have his scalp if he didn't find some syrup to stock, Mr. Newton paid the price, and they loaded the syrup onto the floor of the sled in front of the bundles of cloth. And then they headed down to Pownell. By now it was late morning, and the sun was about as high as it was going to get. Even so, the light was weak and paltry in the cold air. The Yarmouth man had given them new embers for the foot warmers, but the air grew colder as they got farther from the sea, and the road more desolate and the houses a little more desperate, as though they were already losing the battle against winter. Wood smoke hung heavily over them, lowering across the house fronts onto the spruce branches patterned around the foundations. Turner grew less and less hopeful the farther they went, and he wondered what he would say when they got to the asylum. How would he get Lizzie out? And what would Phippsburg say when he brought her home? Well, he would bring her home anyway. But when they finally reached the Pownell home for the feeble-minded, Turner almost thought they should just turn around. An iron fence surrounded it, topped with sharp spikes, sharp as needles. Beyond them, a frozen expanse of gray, dirty ice, the snow whisking across it in wispy curls and then disappearing. Beyond that, a few bare elms arching high and graceful, though in that bare landscape looking like the skeletons of trees. And beyond them, a brick square of a building with small windows, barred on the first 2 levels, bricked over on the third. No smoke came out of the center chimney. It all looked as deserted as if the flood had newly receded and left this one cold building in its wake. A cold and annoyed guard left the gatehouse to let them onto the grounds. Another cold and annoyed guard opened the front door to their repeated knocks. A cold and annoyed matron led them to her office and sat them down on one side of her desk, while she ascended to the lofty chair behind it. She listened to Turner say that they had come to fetch Lizzie Griffin. She pointed out that one could not simply waltz into the asylum and remove those committed to it. Turner asked if they might at least see Lizzie. Without answering, the matron went to her files. She returned with a card and informed them that that would be impossible. Mr. Newton asked why. "Because," said the matron, "Elizabeth Bright Griffin died 10 days after coming to this institution." Turner felt the cold of the place come into him. He could not move. It was as though the bricks surrounded him and him alone. He felt that he would never escape them, never see anyone he loved again, never see the ocean waves again. That he would always be cold, and the cold would be in him more than around him. The matron stood. "Those people hardly ever last long when they come here," she said. "Will there be anything else?"